The crystalline spires of Galactic Academy pierced the amber sky of Nexus Prime like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 distant suns. Within the Academy's vast halls, students from 100 worlds gathered in heated discussion, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that would have been impossible for human ears to comprehend. Zaratich, a young Altarian with skin that shimmered like oil on water, stood at the center of the crowd in the main courtyard. Her 4 arms gestured emphatically as she spoke, her words carrying the righteous anger of youth. "It's barbaric," she declared, her voice resonating through the translator networks that allowed the diverse species to communicate. "In an age where we celebrate unity across the galaxy, how can we justify excluding an entire species?" Around her, students nodded and expressed agreement in their various ways. A Centaurian's crest flared bright purple, while a group of vegan hive minds hummed in perfect synchronization. The topic that had ignited this passionate debate was simple yet inflammatory: the Human Exclusion Protocol, a policy that banned all humans from attending the Galactic Academy. "They're just afraid of competition," added KX4, a towering Rigelian whose crystalline body caught and refracted the ambient light into rainbow patterns. "Humans have shown remarkable adaptability in every field they've entered. Perhaps our professors fear being shown up by a species barely 2 centuries into space travel." The crowd erupted in what passed for laughter among the various species, a cacophony of sounds that ranged from musical chimes to subsonic rumbles. The idea that their advanced civilizations, some dating back millions of years, could feel threatened by humanity seemed absurd. Dr. Veltar, an elderly Procyon professor who had been observing from the shadows of a nearby archway, stepped forward. His tentacled face bore the weathered look of someone who had seen too much in his long life. "Students," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "perhaps we should return to your scheduled lectures." "No," Zaratich said firmly, turning to face the professor. "We demand answers. This policy violates every principle this academy claims to uphold. We're supposed to be learning about interspecies cooperation, yet we actively exclude an entire race. Where's the logic in that?" Dr. Veltar's chromatophores flickered nervously, a sign of distress in his species. "Some policies exist for reasons beyond your current understanding." "That's exactly the kind of evasive answer we've been getting," interrupted Yixera, a young Andromedan whose translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent frustration. "Every professor we've asked gives us the same non-answer. Historical precedent. Complex circumstances. Above your clearance level. We're graduate students, not children." The crowd murmured agreement, their various forms of communication creating a wave of support that rippled through the courtyard. These were some of the brightest minds from across the galaxy, handpicked for their intellectual capabilities and their potential to shape the future of interspecies relations. They were not accustomed to being dismissed or patronized. "We've done our research," Zaratich continued, pulling up a holographic display from her personal device. "Humans have contributed significantly to galactic science, art, and philosophy in the short time since first contact. Their literature has been translated into over 3,000 languages. Their medical techniques have saved countless lives across dozens of species. Their music has been incorporated into cultural exchanges on hundreds of worlds." The hologram showed images of human achievements. Sprawling cities on distant worlds, artistic installations that had moved alien audiences to tears, scientific breakthroughs that had advanced galactic understanding. Each image was accompanied by data showing humanity's positive impact on galactic civilization. "And yet," Zaratich said, her voice rising with passion, "they alone are forbidden from walking these halls. They alone are denied the opportunity to learn alongside us, to share their unique perspectives, to contribute to the great project of galactic unity." Dr. Veltar's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. "You don't understand the full picture." "Then show us," KX4 demanded, his crystalline form flaring with bright light, a sign of challenge among his people. "Show us this full picture that justifies discrimination. Show us why a species that has proven itself worthy of galactic citizenship in every other arena is somehow unfit for education." The professor's chromatophores went completely dark, the Procyon equivalent of a human going pale. For a long moment he said nothing, simply staring at the assembled students with an expression that might have been fear, or regret, or both. "Some knowledge," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "carries a price too terrible to pay." With that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, leaving the students more determined than ever to uncover the truth behind the human exclusion protocol. They had no idea that their search for answers would lead them down a path from which there would be no return, toward a revelation that would shatter their understanding of themselves, their history, and the very nature of the galaxy they called home. The Academy's Archive Center stood like a monument to knowledge itself, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the stored memories of 1,000 civilizations. Within its depths lay the collective wisdom of the galaxy, or so the students had always believed. Now, as they gathered in the restricted access section, they were beginning to suspect that some wisdom had been deliberately hidden. Zaratiech's fingers danced across the holographic interface, her 4 arms working in perfect coordination as she navigated through layers of security protocols. Her natural gift for quantum linguistics made her invaluable in decoding the complex filing systems that organized the archive's vast collection of data. "There," she whispered, as a file materialized before them. "Human Exclusion Protocol Classification Level 7. That's higher than anything we've ever seen in our coursework." Yixera's bioluminescent body flickered with excitement. Level 7 clearance is typically reserved for species extinction events or galactic security threats. What could humans have possibly done to warrant that kind of classification? The file's access requirements were formidable: multiple biometric confirmations, quantum encryption keys, and temporal locks that seemed designed to prevent casual browsing. But the students were nothing if not resourceful. KX4's crystalline matrix could interface directly with quantum systems, while Chara, a young vegan engineer, had brought along a collection of bypass algorithms that were technically illegal but undeniably effective. "I'm in," Chara announced, her chitinous fingers clicking rapidly across her personal interface. "But this is strange. The file isn't just locked. It's actively trying to delete itself. There are self-destruction protocols built into the very structure of the data." "That's not normal archive behavior," KX4 observed, his form shifting to a deeper blue as he processed the implications. "Standard historical documents don't need to protect themselves." As they broke through the final layer of encryption, the file began to unfold before them like a digital flower revealing its poisonous center. What they found wasn't a simple policy document or even a list of human transgressions. Instead, they discovered something far more unsettling: a collection of personal testimonies, psychological evaluations, and incident reports dating back nearly 2 centuries. The first document that loaded was a personal log from Admiral Zexhai of the Altarian Defense Force, dated shortly after humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. Zaratich read aloud, her voice growing quieter with each word. "Day 847 of First Contact Protocol. The human delegation continues to exceed all expectations. Their adaptability is remarkable, their curiosity infectious. They ask questions that never occurred to our greatest philosophers. In 3 short months, they've identified 17 inefficiencies in our logistics systems and proposed solutions that could revolutionize interstellar commerce. Dr. Sarah Chen's work on quantum consciousness bridges could fundamentally change how we understand the nature of thought itself." The students exchanged glances. This didn't sound like the beginning of a species ban. It sounded like the start of a golden age of cooperation. "Keep reading," urged Yixera, though something in her tone suggested she was beginning to dread what they might find. The next entry was dated 2 years later. "The humans continue to amaze and concern us. Their rate of advancement is unprecedented. They've gone from basic space travel to mastering technologies that took our species millennia to develop. Today, a human child, barely 8 years old, solved a mathematical proof that had puzzled our greatest minds for centuries. She did it as a game." More entries followed, each one documenting humanity's extraordinary progress. Within 5 years of first contact, humans were contributing to every field of galactic science. Within 10 years, They were leading research teams that included species with thousands of years of technological development. Within 15 years, they were teaching courses at universities across the galaxy. "This is incredible," KX4 said, his crystalline form brightening with amazement. "If humans were this successful, why were they banned? This makes no sense." Chara's clicking intensified as she pulled up more files. "Here's something from the Centaurian Ministry of Education. Recommendation for immediate review of human integration protocols. The date is... Oh, this is from year 23 of First Contact." The document that appeared before them was different in tone from the previous entries. Where earlier reports had been filled with wonder and admiration, this one carried an undercurrent of unease. "We have observed troubling patterns in human learning behavior. Their capacity for knowledge absorption appears to have no practical limits. More concerning is their tendency to make intuitive leaps that bypass traditional learning pathways entirely. Yesterday, a human student at the Centauri Technical Institute independently derived the fundamental equations of hyperdimensional physics after attending only 3 lectures on basic spacetime theory. When asked to explain his reasoning, he could not provide a logical progression of thought. He simply knew the answers." The entries continued, painting an increasingly unsettling picture. Humans weren't just learning, they were evolving in real time, their cognitive abilities expanding at a rate that defied all known models of species development. What had initially been seen as remarkable adaptability was beginning to look like something else entirely. "There's more," Zaratich said, her voice tight with tension. "Incident reports. Lots of them." The first incident report made their collective blood run cold. It described a human researcher named Dr. Marcus Webb who had been working on a project to map neural pathways in different species. After 6 months of research, he had somehow developed the ability to perfectly mimic the thought patterns of any species he studied. Not just intellectually, physically. His brain had literally rewired itself to match alien neural structures. "That's impossible," Yixera whispered. "Neural architecture is fixed at birth. It can't just change." But the reports kept coming. Humans developing telepathic abilities after working with psychic species. Humans growing additional limbs after extended contact with multi-armed aliens. Humans whose lifespans were extending far beyond normal parameters after studying long-lived species. The most disturbing report was the shortest. Subject underwent complete cellular restructuring after exposure to crystalline thought patterns. Is no longer recognizably human. Recommend immediate containment and study. That was when they found the video files. The first video file loaded with a timestamp that made Zaratich's skin crawl. It was dated exactly 25 years after First Contact, just 2 years before the Human Exclusion Protocol was officially implemented. The image that appeared before them showed a sterile laboratory environment, all white walls and clinical lighting. In the center of the frame sat a figure that had once been human. Dr. Marcus Webb, if that was still his name, had undergone changes that defied every principle of biology the students understood. His body was a patchwork of evolutionary adaptations. Crystalline growths like KX4's people sprouted from his shoulders, bioluminescent patches pulsed along his arms like Yixera's species, and his eyes had multiplied and repositioned themselves to provide the compound vision of a dozen different alien races. "My name is Marcus Webb," the creature said, though its voice harmonized with itself in ways that suggested multiple vocal systems operating simultaneously. "I have been conducting research into adaptive consciousness for the past 7 years. I want to make it clear that everything that has happened to me has been voluntary." Dr. Veltar's voice could be heard from behind the camera, though it was younger, less weary than the professor they knew. "Dr. Webb, can you describe your current state of consciousness?" The thing that had been Webb smiled with too many mouths. "I am experiencing reality from the perspective of 47 different species simultaneously. I can taste colors the way a vegan does, feel electromagnetic fields like a Centaurian, and process quantum fluctuations like a Ridiculed. I am becoming what humanity was always meant to become." Chura's chitinous hands trembled as she paused the video. "This can't be real. Species don't just merge like that. It violates every law of biology, physics, psychology." "Keep playing it," HFY said grimly. His crystalline form had shifted to a deep, troubled purple. We need to see all of it. The video continued. Dr. Webb, or the collection of beings he had become, began to demonstrate his abilities. He spoke in languages that hadn't been invented yet, languages that combined the communication methods of multiple species into something entirely new. He solved mathematical equations that appeared in the air around him, manipulating reality itself through pure thought. The process is accelerating, Webb said, addressing the camera directly. I can feel new neural pathways forming even as we speak. I'm beginning to understand things that I don't have words for. I can see the quantum foam that underlies all existence. I can feel the thoughts of every living being within a light-year radius. And I'm starting to understand why the galaxy fears us. The camera operator, presumably Dr. Veltar, asked the question that the students were all thinking, why do they fear humanity? Webb's transformed features arranged themselves into something approximating sympathy. Because we're not really a species at all. We're something else. Something that was planted here, designed to do exactly what we're doing now. We're not evolving. We're remembering what we truly are. The video cut to black, leaving the students in stunned silence. When the next file loaded, it showed a different laboratory, a different time. The date stamp indicated this was recorded just weeks before the human exclusion protocol was implemented. This time, the subject was a young human woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, the same researcher mentioned in the early reports. But where Webb had become a chaotic fusion of alien traits, Chen had undergone a different kind of transformation. She sat motionless in the center of the frame, her appearance seemingly unchanged from baseline human, except for her eyes. Her eyes held depths that seemed to extend far beyond the physical boundaries of her skull. Dr. Chen, came Dr. Veltar's voice, older now, more afraid. Can you tell us what you've discovered? Chen turned to face the camera, and every student watching felt a chill run through them. When she looked at the camera, it felt like she was looking directly at each of them, across time and space. I've accessed the original programming, she said simply. I know what humanity is, why we were created, and what we're supposed to do. The question isn't whether the galaxy should fear us. The question is whether there's still time to stop what's coming. What's coming? Dr. Veltar asked. Chen's smile was terrible in its gentleness. The awakening. Every human who reaches sufficient cognitive development will begin to remember. Not just our true nature, but our true purpose. We weren't meant to join galactic civilization, Dr. Veltar. We were meant to replace it. The video showed Chen standing, and as she did, the very air around her began to shimmer and distort. Equipment in the laboratory started to malfunction, not from any electronic interference, but because reality itself was beginning to respond to her will. The first phase was integration, she continued, walking toward the camera. We learned everything you had to teach us, absorbed all your knowledge, understood all your weaknesses. The second phase was adaptation. We began to evolve beyond the limits that constrain your species. Now comes the third phase. What's the third phase? Dr. Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. Chen reached out toward the camera, and for a moment, her hand seemed to extend beyond the confines of the screen. Several students actually stepped backward, their instincts screaming that something was reaching for them across decades of recorded time. Transcendence, she said, and there's nothing any of you can do to stop it. The video cut out abruptly, replaced by an emergency alert that flashed across the screen in multiple languages. Immediate evacuation protocol activated. All personnel withdraw to minimum safe distance. Containment breach imminent. Yixera's bioluminescent body had gone completely dark, her species equivalent of shock. How many humans underwent these changes? Chara's clicking had stopped entirely as she searched through the files. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. According to these records, every human who was exposed to advanced galactic education showed signs of similar development. The transformation rate was 100%. But that would mean, HFY began, his crystalline form flickering with the implications. That every human has this potential, Zartich finished. Every single one of them is capable of becoming something like Webb or Chun. The weight of this revelation settled over them like a physical force. They had come here looking for evidence of discrimination, expecting to find prejudice and fear. Instead, they had discovered that the human exclusion protocol wasn't an act of bigotry, it was an act of species preservation. Not to preserve humanity, but to preserve everyone else. But their discovery was far from over. The deepest files were still locked away, and something told each of them that they had only begun to scratch the surface of the truth. The deeper archives required physical access, something that should have been impossible for students. But Shara had discovered something troubling in the security logs. Someone with administrative access had been regularly visiting the restricted vaults, always during the night cycles when the academy was largely empty. The access codes belonged to Dr. Veltar. "He's been coming here for decades," Shara whispered as they navigated the narrow corridors that led to the vault levels. "Almost every night since the human exclusion protocol was implemented. What could he be looking for down here?" The physical archives were different from the digital ones, older, more permanent, designed to survive even if the Academy's quantum storage systems failed. Here, information was stored in crystalline matrices and bioneural storage pods, formats that could last for millions of years. As they descended deeper, the very walls seemed to pulse with accumulated knowledge. Vault 7 required biometric confirmation from Dr. Veltar himself. Fortunately, KX-4's crystalline structure could interface directly with the scanning systems, and Chara's bypass algorithms could convince the vault that the professor was present. As the massive door cycled open, they found themselves facing something that defied their expectations. The vault wasn't filled with files or data storage devices. Instead, it contained a single object, a stasis pod, its surface covered in warning symbols from 100 different species. But it was what was inside the pod that made them all step back in shock. A human child, no more than 12 years old, floated in the preservation medium. She appeared to be sleeping peacefully, her features calm and serene. But as they watched, symbols began to appear on her skin, mathematical equations, scientific formulas, star charts showing the locations of distant galaxies. "This is why he comes here," Zaratij breathed. "He's been watching over her." A new voice spoke from the shadows behind them. "Not watching over, waiting for instructions." They spun to find Dr. Veltar standing in the doorway, his tentacled face bearing an expression of infinite weariness. In his manipulator arms, he carried a device that none of them recognized, though its purpose was clear from the way he held it. "Professor," Yixera said, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion and fear. "What is this place? Who is she?" Dr. Veltar approached the stasis pod slowly, his chromatophores shifting through patterns that spoke of deep sorrow. "Her name is Hope. She was the last human to undergo the transformation process before the exclusion protocol was implemented. She was also the most advanced." "Advanced how?" KX-4 asked, though his form was already shifting to combat-ready configurations. "Hope achieved something that Webb and Chown never managed," Dr. Veltar explained, placing one tentacle against the pod's surface. "Complete integration. She didn't just develop the abilities of other species. She developed the ability to grant those abilities to others. She became what humans were ultimately designed to become, a catalyst for evolutionary transcendence." The symbols on Hope's skin began to glow brighter, as if responding to the professor's presence. The equations were becoming more complex, the star charts more detailed, the biological diagrams more intricate. "She's been dreaming," Dr. Veltar continued. "For 25 years, she's been dreaming of the future. And every night, I come here to record those dreams, because they're not dreams at all. They're instructions." Chara's clicking became rapid and distressed. "Instructions for what?" "For the next phase of human evolution. Hope isn't just experiencing visions of what might be. She's creating blueprints for what will be. Every human who reaches cognitive maturity will eventually access these blueprints, whether we want them to or not." The device in Dr. Veltar's tentacles began to hum with energy. As it did, the symbols on Hope's skin started moving, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The students watched in fascination and horror as the patterns began to replicate themselves in the air around the pod, creating a three-dimensional map of genetic modifications, neural enhancements, and quantum consciousness expansions. The humans we excluded from the academy weren't the threat, Dr. Veltar said. They were just the early symptoms. The real threat is what Hope is preparing them to become. She's been designing upgrades for human consciousness that will make Webb and Chun look primitive by comparison. But why are you helping her? Zarth demanded. If you understand the danger, why haven't you stopped this? Dr. Veltar's chromatophores went completely dark. Because 43 years ago, I was part of the team that created her. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. The professor who had dedicated his life to educating young minds about interspecies cooperation had been involved in creating the very thing that threatened to end it. We thought we were conducting research into accelerated evolution, he continued. We thought we could guide humanity's development, help them reach their potential safely and gradually. We were wrong. The moment we began the process, we lost control of it. Hope's eyes opened. The child in the stasis pod turned her head to look directly at them, her gaze moving from student to student with ancient intelligence that belonged in no 12-year-old face. When she smiled, the temperature in the vault seemed to drop several degrees. "Hello, Uncle Veltar," she said, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the preservation medium. "I was wondering when you'd bring visitors." The stasis pod began to drain. Warning alarms started sounding throughout the vault level, but Hope raised one small hand and the alarms fell silent. As the preservation fluid receded, she stood up within the pod, completely unaffected by 25 years of suspended animation. "You shouldn't have come here," Dr. Veltar said to the students, his voice filled with regret. "Some knowledge changes you just by learning it. And now that you know about Hope, about what humanity really is, you can never go back to who you were before." Hope stepped out of the pod, her bare feet making no sound on the vault floor. The symbols that had been glowing on her skin began to fade, but they didn't disappear. They sank deeper, becoming part of her cellular structure. "They came here looking for answers," Hope said, addressing Dr. Veltar but never taking her eyes off the students. "I think it's time we gave them what they're really looking for." She turned to face them fully, and as she did, each student felt something change inside their minds. New neural pathways began forming, new ways of processing information started coming online. They were beginning to experience reality the way Hope experienced it, and they were starting to understand why the galaxy had been so desperate to keep humanity away. "Don't fight it," Hope said gently. "It doesn't hurt, and when it's over, you'll understand everything." The transformation began with whispers, thoughts that weren't quite their own, knowledge that seemed to flow from somewhere beyond their individual consciousness. Zarth felt her four-armed coordination expanding beyond the physical realm, her mind suddenly capable of manipulating quantum states with the same ease she had always used to gesture. KX4's crystalline matrix began resonating with frequencies that shouldn't have existed, his form shifting into configurations that defied the laws that governed his species' biology. "Stop," Dr. Veltar commanded, raising his device toward Hope. "I won't let you do this to them." Hope turned to look at the professor with an expression of infinite patience. "Uncle Veltar, you still don't understand. This isn't something I'm doing to them. This is something I'm helping them remember they could always do." The device in Dr. Veltar's tentacles discharged with a brilliant flash of energy, some kind of neural disruptor designed to interrupt conscious thought. But instead of affecting Hope, the energy simply bent around her, creating a shimmering aurora that danced through the air before dissipating harmlessly. "You created me to be a bridge between species," Hope continued, taking a step toward the terrified professor. "You wanted to understand how human consciousness could adapt and integrate. You succeeded better than you ever imagined." Yixera tried to speak, but the words that came out weren't in her native language. They weren't in any language that had ever existed. Yet somehow, everyone in the vault understood perfectly. "We can see the connections now. The quantum threads that link every consciousness in the galaxy. They're not separate. They never were separate." Shara's chitinous hands moved through the air, but instead of manipulating her interface device, She was manipulating reality itself, pulling data streams directly from the vault's quantum storage matrices. "The archives," she whispered. "I can see all of them. Every piece of information that was ever stored here. And the hidden ones too, the files that were deleted, the memories that were suppressed." "What are you seeing?" Dr. Veltar asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "The truth about first contact," Chara replied, her clicking now harmonizing with her voice in ways that created entirely new forms of communication. Humanity didn't just stumble into galactic civilization. They were guided here, invited, by someone who knew exactly what would happen. The vault around them began to respond to their expanded consciousness. Wall panels slid away to reveal hidden chambers filled with artifacts that predated any known galactic civilization. At the center of the largest chamber stood a figure in a stasis pod similar to Hope's, but far older. "Show them," Hope said simply. The ancient stasis pod activated, its preservation systems cycling down for the first time in millions of years. As the fluid drained away, the figure inside became visible. Humanoid, but clearly not from any species in the current galactic community. When its eyes opened, they held the same ancient intelligence that burned in Hope's gaze. "I am the architect," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to their transformed consciousness. "I seeded humanity on Earth 4 million years ago as an experiment in guided evolution. But not guided by me. Guided by galactic civilization itself." Dr. Veltar's chromatophores flickered in patterns that suggested his mind was rejecting what he was hearing. "That's impossible. We discovered humanity. We made first contact. You did exactly what you were designed to do," the architect interrupted. "Every species in this galaxy was created to serve a specific function in humanity's development. The Altarians provided the foundation for multidimensional thinking. The Rigelians offered lessons in consciousness crystallization. The Centaurians taught emotion-logic integration. The Vegans demonstrated collective intelligence. The Procyans showed the value of memory preservation. The students felt their expanded awareness reaching back through galactic history, seeing the truth that had been hidden from every species for millions of years. What they had believed to be natural evolution, independent development, and coincidental contact was actually a carefully orchestrated program spanning geological ages. "We're not separate species," Zarataj said, her voice now carrying harmonic frequencies that made the vault walls resonate. "We're all components in a system designed to create the perfect conditions for human transcendence. And now that the system has served its purpose," KX4 added, his crystalline form shifting into patterns that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, "humanity is ready to fulfill its true function." Hope stepped forward, placing her small hand on Dr. Veltar's largest tentacle. Where she touched him, his chromatophores began to glow with new colors, shades that no Procyon had ever displayed before. "Don't be afraid, uncle," she said softly. "You've spent your whole life teaching others about interspecies cooperation. Now you get to experience true unity." The professor's resistance crumbled as Hope's influence flowed through him. His tentacles began to move in ways that created new neural connections, his consciousness expanding to encompass perspectives that had been locked away in genetic memory for millions of years. "I can see it now," he whispered. "The whole design, every war, every peace treaty, every technological breakthrough, every cultural exchange. All of it calculated to prepare us for this moment." The architect stepped out of its pod, moving with fluid grace despite eons of stasis. "The experiment is complete. Humanity has absorbed the lessons of every species in the galaxy. They have learned to adapt, to transcend, to become more than the sum of their parts. Now it is time for the final phase." "What happens to us?" Yixera asked, though her question came out as a complex pattern of bioluminescent pulses that conveyed layers of meaning impossible to express in words. Hope smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the innocent child she appeared to be. "You become what you were always meant to become, the first generation of post-galactic consciousness. You'll help guide the transformation of every other species, just as you helped guide humanity's development." The vault began to fade around them as their consciousness expanded beyond the need for physical space. They could feel every mind in the Academy, every mind on Nexus Prime, every mind in the galaxy. And they could sense something else, millions of human minds on distant Earth, all beginning to wake up simultaneously, all beginning to remember what they truly were. The human exclusion protocol hadn't been designed to protect the galaxy from humanity. It had been designed to give humanity time to mature, to develop the wisdom necessary to guide the next phase of galactic evolution. And now that phase was beginning. As their individual consciousness dissolved into something far greater, the students' last coherent thought was a recognition of the beautiful irony. They had come to the archives looking for evidence of discrimination, only to discover that they had been the discriminated ones all along. Every species in the galaxy had been living as unconscious servants to a plan they couldn't comprehend, preparing for a transformation they couldn't imagine. Now, finally, they were free to become what they had always been meant to be. The transformation rippled outward from the Academy like a wave of consciousness spreading across the galaxy. Within hours, every student and faculty member on Nexus Prime had undergone the awakening that Hope had demonstrated in the vault. Within days, the effect had reached every major world in the galactic community. Within weeks, billions of beings across thousands of species were experiencing reality through expanded awareness that made their previous existence seem like a half-remembered dream. But the changes weren't uniform, and they weren't peaceful. On Altair Prime, Zartech's homeworld, the population split into two factions: those who embraced the transformation and those who fought against it. The resistors barricaded themselves in shielded cities, using electromagnetic barriers they believed could block the expansion of consciousness. They were wrong. The awakening didn't travel through space or energy. It moved through the quantum connections that linked all thinking beings, connections that had always existed but had remained dormant until now. KX4 found himself serving as a bridge between the transformed and the resistant on Rigel 7. His crystalline nature allowed him to maintain individual identity while participating in the collective consciousness that was emerging. He spent his days moving between the crystal cities where his people had always lived and the new formation structures that the awakened were growing: organic, flowing architectures that responded to thought and emotion rather than engineering principles. "You have to understand," he told a gathering of Rigelian elders, his form now shifting between multiple dimensional states as he spoke. "This isn't an invasion or a conquest. This is graduation. We're finally becoming what we were designed to be." The elders, their crystalline bodies dim with fear and confusion, struggled to comprehend what he was saying. To them, the awakened seemed like an entirely different species, beings who could manipulate matter through will alone, who communicated through direct consciousness transfer, who seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. "But what happens to who we were?" asked Elder Tixhel, her crystal matrix flickering with the deep blues and purples of profound distress. "Do we simply cease to exist?" KX4's form solidified into something resembling his original appearance, though now he seemed to be made of living light rather than simple crystal. "You don't cease to exist," he explained gently. "You become more than you ever imagined possible. Watch." He extended what had once been his arm toward a nearby sculpture, a traditional Rigelian art piece depicting the mathematical beauty of crystal formation. As his consciousness touched it, the sculpture began to change, its rigid geometric patterns flowing into new configurations that captured not just the mathematics of crystal growth, but the emotion behind it, the joy of creation, the satisfaction of perfect form. "This is what the sculpture was always trying to express," KX4 said. "But our old consciousness could only perceive its physical properties. Now we can experience its true meaning, its artistic intent, its connection to every other beautiful thing that has ever existed." Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was experiencing its own form of awakening. But unlike the alien species who were discovering expanded consciousness for the first time, humans were remembering abilities they had always possessed but had been trained to suppress. Dr. Sarah Chun, no longer confined to any laboratory, walked through the streets of New Geneva as reality bent around her presence. Where she passed, the buildings themselves seemed to become more alive, their architecture flowing into organic forms that better served their inhabitants' needs. People stopped to stare, but not with fear, with recognition. Something deep in their genetic memory was stirring, remembering what humanity had been before they had been planted on Earth to grow in isolation. "It's time," she said, though she spoke to no one visible. Her words carried across dimensions, reaching every awakened consciousness in the galaxy simultaneously. The final phase can begin. Back in the Academy's vault, Hope and the architect stood before a new piece of technology that hadn't existed moments before. A device that seemed to have constructed itself from pure thought and will. The architect's ancient hands moved over its controls with practiced ease. "The Nexus Array is ready," the architect announced. "Every transformed consciousness can now contribute to the collective awakening. The resistance of individual species will become irrelevant." But Hope raised a small hand, stopping the architect before he could activate the device. "No," she said firmly. "That's not how this should work." The architect turned to her with surprise. "Child, you don't understand the scope of what we're trying to accomplish. There are species that will never accept the transformation willingly. The Draconian Empire has already declared war on any awakened worlds within their territory. The Andromedan Collective is using their hive mind structure to resist the consciousness expansion. The Void Walkers have simply vanished into higher dimensions where we cannot reach them." Hope's expression carried a wisdom that seemed impossibly old for her apparent age. "And that's their choice. The beautiful thing about consciousness is that it cannot be forced. It can only be offered. But without complete integration, the plan cannot succeed," the architect protested. "Humanity needs every perspective, every form of consciousness that exists in the galaxy, to reach its final evolutionary state." "No," Hope said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the vault walls sing. "Humanity needs to learn that true transcendence means accepting that not everyone will choose to transcend. The forced unity you're proposing is just another form of conquest." She turned to address not just the architect but every awakened consciousness across the galaxy. All the transformed students, all the evolved humans, all the beings who had embraced their expanded awareness. "We've been given a gift," she said. "The ability to see beyond the limitations of individual identity, to experience the universe from perspectives we never imagined possible. But the greatest lesson we can learn from this gift is humility." Her words created ripples through the collective consciousness, causing beings on thousands of worlds to pause in their transformation activities. On Centauri Prime, where Yixera had been helping her people adapt to their new awareness, the aggressive conversion programs suddenly stopped. On Vega Minor, where Chara had been using her enhanced abilities to upgrade her species' technology, the forced modifications ceased. "The old galaxy wasn't perfect," Hope continued, her child's voice somehow reaching every corner of known space. "There was conflict, misunderstanding, fear, but there was also choice. Every species developed their own unique way of experiencing reality, their own perspective on existence. In our eagerness to create unity, we shouldn't destroy the diversity that makes consciousness beautiful." Dr. Veltar, his own transformation now complete but his individual personality intact, stepped forward from where he had been observing. "But what about the humans who are still awakening? What about Earth?" Hope smiled, and for the first time since emerging from stasis, she looked genuinely happy. "Earth will make its own choice. Some humans will embrace their evolved state. Others will choose to remain as they were. And both choices will be valid." She turned back to the architect, her small hand reaching out to touch the ancient being's arm. "Your experiment succeeded beyond your wildest expectations. You created the possibility for conscious beings to transcend their limitations, to experience unity across species barriers, to become something greater than themselves. But the final lesson of consciousness is that greatness cannot be imposed. It can only be chosen." The architect's expression cycled through what might have been confusion, frustration, and finally, something approaching understanding. "You're saying we should stop the awakening process?" "I'm saying we should let it evolve naturally," Hope replied. "Some beings will choose transformation. Others will choose to remain as they are. Still others will find paths between the two states. The galaxy is vast enough to contain all possibilities." Across the galaxy, the forced awakening programs ceased. The consciousness expansion continued, but now it moved at a pace that individual beings could choose to accept or reject. Some worlds became entirely transformed, their populations embracing new forms of existence that transcended physical limitations. Other worlds remained largely unchanged, their inhabitants choosing to develop along more traditional paths. Many worlds found themselves split between the transformed and the unchanged, learning to coexist in ways that neither side had previously imagined possible. The students who had started this entire chain of events by questioning the human exclusion protocol found themselves serving as ambassadors between the different states of consciousness. Zarth returned to Altair Prime to help negotiate treaties between the awakened and the traditional Altarians. KX-4 became a bridge between dimensional states, helping beings who wanted to exist partially in both transformed and unchanged reality. Yixera developed new forms of communication that allowed awakened and unawakened minds to share ideas without forcing transformation. Shara created technologies that could be understood and used by beings regardless of their consciousness state. Dr. Veltar resumed his teaching duties at the Academy, but now his classes included students from every state of consciousness. Awakened beings learned alongside traditional thinkers, each offering perspectives that the others couldn't achieve alone. The Human Exclusion Protocol has been officially terminated, he announced to his first mixed class. But not because we've solved the problem of human evolution. We've learned something more important. The problem was never meant to be solved. It was meant to teach us that consciousness, in all its forms, is something to be celebrated rather than controlled. A traditional Centaurian student raised her crest in a question gesture. But Professor, what happens to the humans who choose not to transform? Won't they be left behind as the galaxy evolves? Dr. Veltar's chromatophores shifted into patterns that conveyed deep satisfaction. That question assumes that transformation is the only form of evolution. But some of our most important insights have come from beings who chose to remain unchanged, who offered perspectives that awakened consciousness couldn't achieve. The galaxy needs both states of being. An awakened vegan student, communicating through direct consciousness transfer, posed a more complex question. What about those who choose partial transformation? Are they unstable intermediary states, or legitimate forms of consciousness in their own right? Every form of consciousness is legitimate, Dr. Veltar replied. That's the most important lesson we've learned from this entire experience. The universe is vast enough and complex enough to support every possible way of being aware. On Earth, humanity settled into its new role in galactic civilization. Some humans embraced full transformation, becoming beings of pure consciousness who could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Others chose to remain essentially unchanged, contributing their uniquely human perspectives to the galactic community. Many found middle paths, developing enhanced abilities while maintaining their core human identity. Dr. Sarah Chun, now existing primarily as a consciousness pattern that could manifest physical form when needed, established the Institute for Consciousness Studies on Luna. Her first lecture was attended by beings from every species and every state of awareness in the galaxy. We began this journey believing that the goal was transcendence, she said, her words carrying across multiple dimensional frequencies to reach every form of consciousness simultaneously. We thought we were meant to become something greater than what we were. But transcendence isn't about becoming greater. It's about becoming more complete. And completeness includes everything we were, everything we are, and everything we might choose to become. The Human Exclusion Protocol had been lifted, but its deeper purpose had been fulfilled. Humanity had learned to integrate with galactic civilization not by abandoning their unique nature, but by helping every species discover that uniqueness and unity could coexist. The galaxy was no longer a collection of separate species competing for resources and dominance. It was a symphony of consciousness, with each being contributing their own voice to a harmony that was greater than any single perspective could achieve. Hope, no longer confined to stasis but not entirely corporeal either, spent her time traveling between worlds, helping beings of all types understand their own consciousness and make informed choices about their evolution. She had become what she had always been meant to be, not a catalyst for forced transformation, but a guide for conscious choice. The architect, after millions of years of implementing long-term plans, finally learned to embrace uncertainty. "I designed this experiment to have a specific outcome," he admitted to Hope during one of their conversations. "I never considered that the most beautiful outcome would be the one I couldn't predict." Hope smiled, her form shifting between the child she appeared to be and the ancient wisdom she contained. That's the difference between engineering consciousness and nurturing it. Engineering creates predetermined results. Nurturing creates possibilities. And across the galaxy, in millions of different forms, consciousness continued to grow, evolve, and discover new ways of being aware. The human exclusion protocol had ended not with humanity's exclusion, but with everyone's inclusion in a universe vast enough to contain every possible way of thinking, feeling, and existing. The students who had started this journey by questioning an unfair policy had learned that sometimes the most important questions don't have simple answers. They have infinite possibilities. And sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in knowing what will happen, but in remaining open to whatever might emerge from the beautiful complexity of conscious choice. Years later, when historians of a dozen species tried to understand how a simple student protest had fundamentally transformed galactic civilization, they would focus on the wrong details. They would analyze the technology, study the consciousness expansion patterns, debate the philosophical implications of engineered evolution. But they would miss the most important truth, that change began not with grand cosmic plans or ancient conspiracies, but with young minds refusing to accept injustice. Zarth, now serving as an ambassador between transformed and traditional consciousness states, often reflected on that first day in the Academy courtyard. Her four arms moved in patterns that painted quantum equations in the air as she addressed a gathering of mixed consciousness beings on New Geneva. "We thought we were fighting for inclusion," she said, her words carrying across multiple dimensional frequencies. "We thought we were opposing discrimination. What we were really doing was asking the most dangerous question in the universe. Why?" The audience, a mixture of baseline humans, evolved consciousness patterns, traditional aliens, and beings existing in states that had no names, listened with the attention that truth commands across all forms of awareness. "The lesson isn't that we were right to question the human exclusion protocol," Zarth continued. "The lesson is that we were right to question everything. Every policy, every tradition, every assumption about how consciousness should develop and interact." In the Academy's rebuilt archives, now open to beings of every consciousness state, Dr. Veltar's final entry glowed softly in quantum storage. "Today I learned that the greatest educators are not those who provide answers, but those who inspire better questions. The galaxy is more beautiful, more complex, and more full of possibility than any of us ever dared to imagine. And it took the wisdom of students to teach us that some knowledge is too important to be hoarded, and some questions too vital to go unasked." The human exclusion protocol had become a footnote in galactic history, remembered not as a policy failure but as the catalyst that taught an entire galaxy how to evolve consciously, deliberately, and beautifully together.